I'm Giles. I hail from King's College London's Department of Digital Humanities. There is such a thing. I do the tech on the Our Data Ourselves project, along with three other non-technical colleagues, two of whom are into cultural studies and like their alliteration, hence the data democracy deficit. And the project's about the trail of mobile phone data that most of us do rather tend to leave behind. So, a little aside, it's quite interesting to see how data science is viewed from outside. There are a couple of pop culture references. Here's a book that I haven't read, but someone on the natural language processing Gates project team in Sheffield has. The data scientist is the hero going around disrupting things as people around Old Street are wont to do, using social media to predict the stock market, and it's a thriller. Well, actually, we mostly get our data back to us in the form of targeted ads, and it doesn't always work particularly well. I'm afraid I have a particularly grim example from Privatized Malgorithms column, where they highlight particularly either a grim or amusing examples of ad placement. And suffice it to say, if you're talking about a Holocaust memorial not being built, you don't want an advert about walk-in showers. That's rather darker than we perhaps would have wanted for Sunday morning. So can we do better? I'd suggest that we can, but how aware are mobile device users of this? Can we gather their data and confront them with it? And to what other uses could it be put to? Can we build what my cultural studies colleagues insist on calling a mobile data commons? So can we capture the trail of data that comes from your phone with an app? Was the question posed to me. No, it's a stunningly bad idea. One, it involves that your phone would be, or at least your Android phone would be rooted. So your Android phone is, after all, just a cut down Linux machine, and you don't have admin permission over it. I'll take my watch off so I know how I'm doing. Which is interesting in itself, because you have apps that have little internal SQL-like databases all about you, and if you plug your phone into your laptop and mount it as a mass storage device, you don't get to see it because you don't have root permission. And even if I hypothetically did write an app that required root permissions, well, best case scenario, if we ever get to the Play Store, no one would download it because it's another barrier to entry, which I think is better than everyone going, yeah, I'll root my phone so I can use this app. And I've got to go, well, obviously I don't know the individual specifications of all your phones. I can't do. There are sort of so many of you, hopefully. So if you do root your phone, do make sure you don't use the method that turns out to be malware, eh? No, I mean, I don't want to be responsible for that. So, I must stress, we shall slide share these slides directly afterwards if you want a sort of horror story about Android permissions. Wonderful talk by a security researcher called Georgia Weidman. Another little aside, of which there are probably going to be many I'm quite fond of. Since I started off this project, the sort of person just go install app, click, accept permissions, yes. After doing this for about a year and a half, I've now turned into someone who goes accept permissions, click. Oh, hang on, I probably should have read those. So the permissions model doesn't work. So if we can't root the phone, what can we do? Well, we did eventually, or I at least, eventually perpetrated an app which we call Mobile Miner, and you can work out, by and large, when other apps access the net. You can track things that other apps typically track, like cell IDs, wireless networks, and there's a particularly cheap trick that I've used to log when apps send you notifications. So we gave 20 young developers from an organisation called Rewired Say that organises hack days, Android phones, and together, in fact they did actually join in on the app development. We've created this app. What's it doing now? There's a big stop button. You can stop it from gathering data. It's up to you. I'm on the wireless network Access King's at King's College London. There's a cell tower ID, and Chrome's been up to something. The IP addresses are rubbish. They're just between the phone and the router. But what's actually quite telling is the ports. So how often is Chrome doing things on secure ports? I might gloss over. I might come back to the attitudes of the young coders later. So a little bit more depth about the getting of the data. So Android, there's an API. You can just go. I mean, the Python's coming. I had to suffer the Java. I can't see why you should get off lightly either. You can, on a per app basis, just go how much data has this app used, and you can prod that API call repeatedly. And if the number's increasing, then you've got some sort of network usage event. Also, you're quite at liberty to ferret around in the underlying Linux system, so /proc / whatever the process ID of the Android app /net /TCP. It's a pretty standard format. It doesn't always work, depending on the sort of the group, the Linux group that your app and the other apps are put in. But by and large, browsers worked, Skype and other VoIP services worked, a lot of music worked, some games, more about which later. So we can get network data. GSM cells didn't fancy collecting full GPS. I want to be able to share this data. It's just too invasive. It consumes power. I don't want to sign up the T's, for the Google's location API T's and C's. One is, anyway, because you can't really separate location based on wireless networks from location based on GSM networks. And often, especially around here, if you're in a sort of GPS shadow, the wireless network information is more invasive anyway. So here's a little heat map that the app produced. It's got that I live in Highgate, but it's got me the wrong side of the Archway Road. I can reason sort of slightly about where people live and what they do, but it's not too invasive. It's not too creepy, and you can turn GSM locations into latitude and longitude. Some lovely people called Open Cell ID, and they have some slightly sparse, but it is growing. They have a crowdsourced database of locations. So we've got an app that's churning out all this data, and I want to collect it. I want to be able to display it, play with it, mess with it in, do machine learning on it in hopefully a Pythonic way. How am I going to do that? Well, step forward, ta-da, CKAN, and nobody's heard of it. Well, not in data science circles. This is interesting. To the point where I was at a sort of a vaguely tech do in a pub, and it was a bit noisy, and I started talking about CKAN, and somebody approached me, her eyes lit up. Wow, I'm not the only Perl dev in London. No, sorry, you are. I wasn't talking about CPAN, CAN. So what would we call it? It's a CMS, a content management system for data. It's produced by the Open Knowledge Foundation. It's written in Python. It can integrate with Drupal. Apparently there's data viz, there's analytics. Wonderful. So it calls itself, sometimes it refers to itself as the Drupal of data. It's not that bad, actually. Fairly light on dependencies. It wants Postgres and Apache Solr for search. It's based on pylons. More about that later. Now, not loaded by default, but there's a plugin called the Data Store plugin, and it provides it's mostly about government institutions dolloping large data sets all at once. But you can have an API for quickly and easily allowing having some sort of API for uploading data piecemeal. Runs in a virtual env, and it works. I mean, my project would not have worked without it. It saved me rather a lot of time and rather a lot of code. So it worked as an out-of-the-box solution. Saying that, now I haven't contributed a line of code to CKAN, and I must say it worked well for us. But it would be a bit remiss of me if I didn't sort of criticise some of the things. I think it's a little bit lacking. Though I must stress, I've not lifted a finger to solve any of these problems. So there it is. I mean, it gives you maps. There's a nice little map of all the various GSM cells, or at least the first 100 of them that people have visited. There's my trip to Wales. I'm in this thing too. More on that later. I'll just show you how easy it is to write a plugin. So the phone app is going to have to somehow register a new. That it's been installed and ask for a UID. We're going to have a class that extends CKAN's plugin object. We're going to say I implement the authorization functions, or rather I implement the actions API. Two functions that just return dictionaries, and let's say minor register is the URL, is the endpoint to the end of the URL, and it's going to point to a function called minor data store register. Easy. Just give an example. Slap a decorator on top of this function. It's going to get past the data that comes from the post request. We've got a list incomprehension, as I like to call it, that produces a list of things that aren't in the post data that should be. If there are things missing, it's easy enough to raise a sensible error message. So we're after the Android ID and the version of the app. Create a new user ID, assuming they don't already make sure they don't already exist, and we've just got local referring to a CKAN instance, data store upsert, the resource we're going to put it into the user table, and we just give it a list of dictionaries, the user ID, the Android ID, done. That's just for the app registering itself as a new user. You can imagine the code for actually spitting up the data is just with a little more validation, easy. Let's have a look at the real thing. Can we? Yeah. Let's look at a real one. Oh. Can I move my window? Have a look at the real thing. So there's one running locally. Data sets, mobile minor app data. Let's look at the user locations again. We need, I don't know why the views haven't been created. Data Explorer. Call it default view. Add. Okay, there's our. And here we see some of the limitations. I mean, it's not. You can't expect miracles. It's not the result of a day of banging your head against the bokeh library. So let's zoom in. Well, never. If we look at the grid view, there's it coloured the points in blue. Is there somewhere having a categorical variable for different colours for different users? No, that'd be sort of witchcraft. Apparently, we can filter and sort things if we had if you had a date field that was meaningful to sort. But if I want to filter on this UID, can I drag it? I can't. No, I can't even. There are limitations to the UX. Fair enough. Also, let's look at the list of tables again. In fact, let's just go back to the present. Let's go back to the slides. Come on. If you have things like just a list of user A, used app B at such and such, I mean that in itself is not particularly useful. We want like sort of, what if we wanted a sort of daily aggregate per user per app? We could sort of turn it into a diary, because we had my learned colleagues were having the kids create Tumblr diaries. We can compare that. Well, you think, well, can I just specify, because we've got Postgres, can I specify a query within the within the user interface and just create that derived table? Apparently not. So, but luckily, CKAN does import, run things. You can just have a cron job, and you can create derived tables like that on a sort of a nightly basis, and it does that using Celery. So CKAN supports Celery. We'll have a little word about that. It's a distributed task queue. Now, that I don't know if anyone from the last talk is there, but there was a guy who was doing social and media analytics with doing it all from from scratch with Twisted. It's a distributed task queue, so you can create pipelines by sort of building up bigger tasks from smaller ones in a sort of a way much like Apache Storm. In fact, there are people who've abandoned Apache Storm for Celery. So you can compose, you can have tasks going split across multiple machines. There's a lovely online tool called Flower for monitoring tasks and sort of seeing which node is doing how much of the work. So great, we can do proper data science, and it's all within this. We can embed it within this Pythonic web app. Actually, you can't. They've gone and chosen as the method by which the Celery tasks talk to each other. They've gone and used the database as the broker, which Celery themselves say is particularly flaky and a thing not to do. Now, you could argue that, look, they didn't intend to be a data science platform, they were at data storage. For me, that's a little bit of a sort of a missed opportunity and a failure of ambition. You can actually get CKAN to use a proper broker within Celery. It's not particularly well documented, however. So, okay, but what the other little niggle that I really can't forgive, we've got 5 years. Yeah, gratuitous Bowie reference, but with a purpose. We've got 5 years of supported Python 2.7. CKAN still says it'll support 2.6. Now, they've got a roadmap, and Python 3 isn't on it. The most urgent thing they're doing right now is per dataset issue tracker for users to report back and track issues with datasets. Now, again, it's built on the web framework Pylons, which is now mutated into Pyramid. Pyramid supports Python 3, and there was a migration guide from Pylons to Pyramid written in 2011. So, I must stress, CKAN, it worked for us. It allowed us to collect the data. It allowed us, as you'll soon see, to mess with the data and do amusing things with it. But how much of a deal breaker is the lack of Python 3? And if you've built yourself a huge teetering stack of CKAN extensions, how badly are they going to break when Python 3 does arrive? So bear it in mind. But again, and to be honest, Python 3, I'd so love to not have Unicode hassles. So it's not perfect, but less of the doom and gloom. Let's actually do something with the data. So we've got cell towers. Can we say anything about the users from the list of cell towers, the trails of cell towers they create? Well, it's pretty noisy data. People might not have been using the app. They might have just not had signal. And the cell tower you connect to has as much to do with economics and network traffic as it does, being a proxy for position. Not all the cell towers are known to open cell ID anyway, and I accidentally left this thing running in my pocket when I was going to the Connected Communities Festival at Cardiff, and you can see there are massive gaps in the trail. So if we're going to look at some sort of clustering algorithm to sort of look at user behavior, you've got to take that into account. No, if you have a short discussion of the clustering algorithm we did use, you're not going to use dbScan. dbScan asks you to sort of estimate the sort of minimum density between points in a cluster, and because it's so variable, it works on so many length scales, it's not going to cut it. So it's going to be k-means. Now, this is meant to be intermediate. Is there anyone utterly unfamiliar with k-means? Good. So, but we shan't need to explain the nice little animation, but a little sort of checklist as to whether we should be using it. Convex clusters, lumps. Sort of fairly compact, so if you've got sort of stretched out, noodly extended things, you'll tend to get clusters that cut them in half. Sane number of dimensions, and actually measuring the distance between points and clusters as a, in terms of a Euclidean distance should make sense. And SciKit-Learn enforces this. You cannot pass in a function that's going to measure the distance between points like you can with dbScan. And people do abuse k-means. I've seen tweets as vectors with the sort of binary features, got word, not got word, and they've, as was mentioned in the last talk, they're computing Jacquard distance. It's odd. So there's a lot. Mind you, the same individual who ditched Apache Storm for celery has abused k-means in a good way, but that's because they're really, really clever, possibly cleverer than I. So let's have a go at k-means. We're going to just try latitude and longitude as feature vectors. Now, I don't know if anyone went to the geodata tutorial, but we're kind of treating spherical polar coordinates as Cartesian, so maybe a little bit of a caution. So long as none of the kids using the app join the British Antarctic Survey and go massively far south, we'll probably get away with it. So just as you tend to do with k-means, increase k until the distance, the mean distance from each point to its assigned cluster centroid stops decreasing appreciably. Let's have a first go. Let's have a look. Well, one of the first conditions for using k-means has already been a little bit violated because, of course, we have these trails of points. Now, I could say that looks like a journey, but it's been split into 3, and we've got these blobby clusters that make a bit more sense. Can we do any better? How about latitude, longitude, and their rates of change? Not bad. Again, the 3 extended clusters have been turned into 2, so you could conceivably think of a journey that's there and maybe back again. So k's reduced, the trails of points have coalesced, not much computation of work to think that one up. Quit while you're ahead? No. No, we never learn. Could we have spatial temporal clustering so we can sort of track users' habits that way? Is day of a week a good feature? Well, if it was, you ought to be able to find something that's there's one cluster that's active over all the weekdays as opposed to weekends, but it's not where this individual goes to school, so it's kind of failed there. We've got points leaking from one spatially relevant cluster to another just because they have days in common. Add the hour, does that help? Again, not really. There's nothing that looks like a 9 to 5, and there is one. Well, how about what if we were to take the 24 and the 7 temporal features and have a matrix and do a sort of cross products with the 4 spatial features and get a massive matrix which we flatten into a stupidly large vector? No, stop it. Stop abusing k-means. Let's do something simple instead. We've got a time series of GSM cells which we can turn into a time series of cluster visits, and then just look at the numbers and the times of the visits for each cluster. Count them. How many distinct days has each cluster visited on? What's the range of days of occupation? Does it tend to be proportionally, obviously normalised, sort of 5 out of 7? Is it occupied more on weekdays or weekends? And a slight bit of moderate cleverness with NumPy. Can we look at the range of the times of day when the cluster's occupied? So, if it tends to be occupied at night, all days of the week, that's where you live. Have we found a cluster that's occupied from 9 to 5 of a weekday? That's work or school. We chucked the latitude and longitudes at OpenStreetMap, and we worked out largely where most of the young reward state volunteers were going to school. So remember, apps, real apps, don't just have your location data, your metadata, they also have your content as well. And can we get any greater insights? Well, if you're a student and you've visited multiple cities, 2 occasions each, separated by a couple of weeks each, what are you doing? Well, you're going to university open days and you're attending interviews. And the purpose of this was just to confront the young reward states with their data to get a response and to sort of provoke discussion with my cultural studies colleagues. So we said, hello, you've applied to these universities, here's where you go to school. Do you have a slightly different attitude to Foursquare now? Maybe. So we want to give the data back. We want them to have this data and play with it. We're just, not just static CSV files. We want them to have what we have. So not just the copy of the CKAN instance, because as you've seen, the UI is a bit limited. We want them to prod their data via an Ipython Notebook. We want to throw in SciKit-Learn, the same as we had, and NumPy, all the things we had. And what we want a virtual machine that I can modify, document, distribute, and if I make changes, I don't have to sort of start from scratch rebuilding it. So step forward, Docker. It's been very popular in PyData Meetup Lightning talks for those of a sort of non-Linuxy disposition. In fact, making reference to yesterday's afternoon keynote, if you sort of imagine that your machine has a case of multiple personality disorder and sort of it believes that certain chunks of it are somebody else. It's about using the Linux container kernel modules. So we have a Docker file that specifies how an image is built. Images instantiate containers. Now it's kind of strictly Linux. Now there is boot to Docker for Mac and Windows. It's just a sort of it's just a virtual box with a lick of paint and sort of specially purposed for running Docker images. We found that nobody managed to particularly get on with boot to Docker, and everyone could use VirtualBox. So we just shoved our Docker image inside, or containers rather, inside a VirtualBox. Now I don't know if anyone had trouble with stubborn pip installs in the tutorials. I certainly did. I know others did. So if you imagine on college Wi-Fi, giving out all those services, Apache and Solar and all the libraries, and sort of building various bits of SciKit-Learn. Did it work? Yes. Everyone had their data in an Ipython notebook, and they could query it and play with it and talk to each other about it. So this was a proper hack day in the widest sense. We had kids like sort of showing each other the sort of distribution of when Spotify phoned home for them, and they go, look, that's me on the treadmill, that's the walk to school, that I must admit is insomnia and exam stress. And they start thinking, well, if I'm telling you this, well, Spotify must know this, and they start to sort of think about their data a bit more. Docker is great. A few criticisms. A number of times you look on the sort of the Docker hub and you see no Docker file. Well, why don't I just sudo wget not dodgy honest gov install.sh and pipe it through my shell? I'll do that on my box or on my server. Show us the Docker file, which in our instance we have. There are proper sysadmin types who have criticised it in this case in a particularly acerbic but actually fairly measured way in the end, going, that's not proper sysadmin, get off my lawn. And they might have a point. It doesn't work with OpenStack particularly well, but for our purposes, having a virtual machine that I can document, change easily and give away, wonderful. Now I've had a dig at poor old CKAN, so I must say the canonical way of starting multiple services at the end of your Docker container, at the end of your Docker file, is to use supervisor D. It's in Python. It's not in Python 3 yet. More data. Let's actually do stuff with data again. So we're logging the times when apps phone home or send notifications. Does that actually tell us anything about the app or the user or both? Let's look at social networks. Now we know who these individuals are, so we know what their Twitter accounts are. If we look at the degree of your Twitter network versus the number of notifications, well, if you've got a lot of friends and if you haven't used Twitter in 5 minutes, it'll start wondering where you are and going, so-and-so's got a tweet for you. It's pretty binary. Either you're quite into Twitter or you're very into Twitter, and the more the more notifications you get, it's a sort of moderately decent binary predictor as to whether you're into Twitter or not, and your friends count. Followers, of course, you only get a notification based on followers if they do something like favourite or retweet something. So it's a bit noisier. Games are interesting. So is network activity still a proxy for app use? You can actually look at also a sort of a time series of someone's interest in the game peaking and then sort of dying away. It's also interesting to look at the distribution of hourly behaviour. So it's, I guess, vaguely normal. Keen in the mornings, reaches a sort of peak in evenings. Some people are sort of diehards at the end and it tails off. Player B's a bit keen on this game, but we really worried about them with this thing. There's not an hour in the day when the thing isn't phoning home. What could it be? I mean, the kid can't be playing it that frequently. They'd have sort of died one of these tragic multiple massive, MMO World of Warcraft deaths, that happen. So what was it? I mean, it was a stupid little line following game, and every time you crashed, it served you an ad. In fact, absolute seriousness here, I want to know why it thinks I need a Ukrainian mail order bride. I'm not actually joking. We'll get onto this. It wants all the permissions in the world, and this sort of provoked us thinking, well, what is it doing? How long have I had? Ooh, getting to the end. Right, so started getting app reversal tools. There's a thing called AP. You can get the package, the Android package. You can decompile it. There's a file in there called Android Manifest XML, and you can see, oh, it's got all these different services. Some people called JPush, Umeng. There's also Tencent, who are very big in China. You can start decompiling, looking at the source code. And there's the smoking gun. For some reason, it's comparing my latitude to 29 degrees. For some reason, making a decision as to whether to serve an ad or not. Thought, well, that was easy. I thought, well, anyone can do that, can't they? So again, another use case for Docker, just to show if you're sort of holding some sort of hack date, if you want to distribute massive chunks of tools and code, Docker is probably the way to go. So we got a whole load of Android app reversal tools. A lot of them wanted building some source, not the sort of thing you want to sort of have people doing on the day on college Wi-Fi, and because the nice individual that did the Ubuntu VNC desktop has given us his Docker file, we can mess with it and change it. And we held a masterclass on app reversal, held by my learned colleague Darren Martin, now of Xiphos Research. And we jokingly said to each other, we're doing science. I mean, can you expect this to work? We're getting sort of civilians off the street who have never seen the shell, so much as seen the shell before. Are they going to do app reversal? Is it going to work? And there was one, I'm going to embarrass him, but the story ends well. There was one lad, first hanging outside the door, waiting for it to start. He'd brought, I said, bring a laptop. To a hack day, to an Android hacking party, he had brought an iPad with a keyboard attached. I thought, oh, this isn't going to end well. He was back after lunch with his laptop, and by the end of it, he was running around telling people how to use Wireshark. Everybody, I mean, particularly in fact, the non-technical people really stepped up to the plate. They were sort of, I think, protected by their naivety of the sort of the enormity of the task, which is how they were, I think, able to carry it through. But they were asking massively pertinent questions. They were interested. What's root really mean? What's a Dalvik virtual machine then? Questions. So the Python community prides itself on its openness. I think we should really hold ourselves to those sorts of standards. Who knew there was a sort of a whole crowd of latent Android reversal experts wandering around? Well, there are probably latent data scientists and Pythonistas wandering around, if only we can sort of welcome them. So, yep, there's Wireshark. There's the line phoning home. I might talk about some of the In fact, I think I'll ask you a question before I let you ask me questions. Download our app. Go on, don't be frightened. Give me your life. Follow us on Twitter. That's where the slides will be. There's our blog. Don't bother about the slideshare link. I think the key thing is the Twitter account. I think that's coming up to just about half an hour. I might add about where we're going next if anyone's interested. But the question I'd ask you is, we've got this data. We want to sort of turn it into this social commons. We've got some ideas about that as to how we might safely and legitimately and ethically share the data. What would you do with it? So my question to you first. Failing that, any questions? Silence. Yep.
So one of the things that people are very interested in doing is seeing how different groups of people are responding to community and social events. So there's been other talks and other things discussing behaviour during the London riots, behaviour during various protests, and so on and so forth, predictors of social unrest and that kind of thing. And an anonymised data set just showing mass movements is of interest to to organisers of events. If you're running a weekend event and you're expecting a whole pile of people to turn up, quite useful to know in advance whether they're actually arriving. So there's all sorts of potential uses if you can safely share the data and not trace it back.
I will. I'll get back to you on that. That's interesting. I mean, there are loads of papers and visualizations where people have gone cap in hand to a mobile phone provider and come back with a bag of data, but they've signed the NDA. They're very limited as to what they can do with it, and here it is being crowdsourced. So, two possible ways we can go. There's definitely one way I know I'm going. Where's my browser? Come on. Oh, it's where I left it. Right. Let's see. No, not them. They're coming later. That's I've gone and lost the tab. I will come back to these people. There is a bit of software from MIT called OpenPDS, and the next stage is to have the sort of the conceit is you get your own little personal data store which you host yourself. I mean, we've got to sort of believe that people actually go off and do that. I mean, they could just stick it in the cloud where no one will get at it. No, so we've got to think about, will people really, really have a little set-top box device that's their personal data store? And it doesn't. Your phone would, in this instance, I mean, it could be the sort of the Internet of Things or the Internet of Junk, as some people might call it. Your Internet of your house is aggregating data. Your personal data store stores your phone, and there is an API in which the data is queried, not to just give up the data, but to ask questions of it. So you can't just go, give me spit me a list of GSM cells. Was I in this GSM cell? Was I in this set of GSM cells? So you sort of, in some way, there's some sort of abstraction away. So from the query getting too creepy. So that's one route. Some of our learned colleagues who started, in fact, we invited to do another of our hack days. They are artisopensource.net, Salvatore and Oriana. And they have a thing called the Ubiquitous Commons, and this is kind of brave, and they've only just launched it. They're thinking about storing data in something a bit like a Bitcoin blockchain. We'll see how that pans out. I don't know if I can integrate my app with that, and you can sort of think about the sort of various cryptographic means by which you allow or deny certain sorts of data to be used by certain sorts of people for certain sorts of applications. So how we give that out is the next step. And you're right, there's all sorts of ways in which people's data trails have been used positively. The big one is, this comes from the natural language processing course I was at last week, looking at tweets in the outback. There aren't very many of them, and the thing is, you get massive fires in the outback that burn for days because no one's there to report them. And if someone sees a whisper of smoke on the horizon, they're a little bit leery of calling the fire brigade, because what if they're wrong? And you can massively, if you look at loads and loads of tweets from the loads and loads of wisps of smoke on the horizon, and it worked. So there's all sorts of, particularly look at artisopensource.net. Well, I'll tweet the link. There's some massively useful stuff they've done with local communities, where something like what we're aiming for, the social data commons, could actually do good. Does that little rant answer your question? Yeah, it's got its uses, and
it was an answer to your question as well as much as a question to you. So I can see how this could be useful in a number of contexts.
Oh, I was thinking of specifics. I mean, sorry.
The current project, you having seen what you've got, particularly in terms of cell tower trails and clustering and so on. Basically, you stopped at that point and gave it back to them and said that we've collected this and it's very interesting, and here's yours back, and that was
it's yours to play with. Yeah, I mean the next step. I mean it's 20 individuals, so it's something of a proof of concept. We're on to the questions and the discussions. Is that too quick? Okay.
2 minutes left.
Okay. Okay. There's another European project called So Big Data, which is in some ways going to look at expanding the sort of doing stuff with social media and data scraping. So maybe some of it will live on, and maybe it'll become part of this ubiquitous commons thing. I mean, I'd like it to go forward. It's a proof of concept that shows what can be done. I mean, what has yet to be proved is how well can we integrate it with either personal data store or ubiquitous commons, and does it work? For the purposes of the project, it was about returning the data and provoking discussion, so it's fulfilled that purpose. Yep.
You mentioned sort of worries about large corporations using this data. Do you also think about sort of criminals and hackers and individuals?
Well, one, we haven't distributed the data yet. I'm not so much worried about large corporations using the data. It's there's no sort of political slant to this. I mean, they've got it already is the thing. How anonymous is? I mean, just because it's got nobody's name on it, is the data anonymous? Yes, certainly. I mean, we're very mindful that I've got I've got a list of school kids, basically. Of course. But on the other hand, what do we really have that somebody lives in a part of Birmingham, goes to a school in Birmingham, and has visited some universities? Now, in fact, we've got that we're collaborating with the ODI, the Open Data Institute, for the next part of the project. Sort of how can we sort of safely release this stuff? And I've got somebody, the individual is actually looking at it now and thinking, well, what's the worst case scenario? Now, could you scrape Twitter accounts of Birmingham school kids, and if they mention 3 universities, could you it's. Yeah, I mean, worst case scenarios do sort of keep me slightly awake at night, which is why we haven't released the data yet. It's certainly an issue. That's the whole, the point of the project is to not so much the product, but to reason about the issues, of the product. Could we, can we do it? I think that's it. Is that it?
Yeah, we've got 2 minutes or so for questions.
2 more minutes for questions.
If you want to, is it on more?
We've had 2 entire questions or 1.5 questions. Yeah.
You could go the other way and be evasive, but to actually identify where people are within maybe a disaster situation like technology support here or something, where you actually need to identify where people are in.
That's a very good point. We're saying how nice we are in obfuscating the data slightly and having It's like sort of vague location data, and when the crunch comes, yeah, I mean there are plenty of stories where someone's been in the outback and they've triangulated their phone and they've been sort of rescued. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Could we have? Could you maybe have it sort of context sensitive? Look, sort of, don't tell people where I live. Don't tell people where I work. If I'm breaking the pattern, now we've got to detect the pattern with some machine learning, and in fact that's the next stage. I do want to get some spatial temporal clustering going. Maybe thinking about chucking SVMs at the time series of clusters, and can I do it that way? That's an interesting thought. I think we're done. We're done. Thank you.